think of the positive side. Iske baad coffee break.
No, we are fully wide awake for the topic.
Thank you so much. So, since you are there, let's talk about expectations first. Any expectations from the talk? Do you realize what it's going to be? Any guesses? I know Deepthi and I, we purposely have kept the title a little abstract, so it may not be like right in your face of what's going to happen. Just guesswork. There's no wrong answers. What do you think I'm going to speak about?
Bridging the gap between product managers and tech people.
Bridging the gap.
And for the title, you talked about do not get into the trap or fool again.
Okay. Anything else?
Either mistakes in learning or something has been communicated from one team to another. It was false, so I want it full.
That was very deep.
Yeah, way too deep.
Probably in light, I would rather say to explore the lovely relationship of tech and product.
This is positive reinforcement. That's nice. Okay, just a little bit about me. My name is Vishal. I work for a company called ThoughtWorks. And we have seen a number of us speaking since morning, so I'm one of them. And I'm from Pune, I'm not from Gurugram, so you may not see me around very often. I have played a lot of roles in the past, so it becomes difficult for me to actually speak about what I have done and how I have done it. Both tech, non-tech roles, depending on that. The best way to connect with me is LinkedIn. Thoroughly active on that. So that's probably the right place where you and I can connect more, speak more. If you like the talk, then we connect. Let's put it that way. I like telling stories. So this particular session is going to be a storytelling session. I got 2 stories for you. We'll discuss about everything that you said about the relationship between non-tech, tech people and stuff like that. We'll discuss that. There will be a small section towards the end where I do speak about how I have worked as a non-tech person with tech person and how I've taught others to do the same. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. That's a part of experimentation, and that's fine. That's what it is. Okay, so that's the entire session. It will take 40 minutes, not more than that. Cool? So we'll do some quick show of hands or clapping, however you want it. People in tech roles, if you can raise your hands. Cool. Good question. Let's make it more precise. How many of you code? How many of you write code? You program?
Coding.
Little. Alright. How many of you don't write code? Most of you. How many of you have tested products? How many of you have been on the requirement side, the product managers, the BAs? Wonderful. How many of you know how many types of honeybees are there? Oh, wrong conference. You came to the right place. No, generally, do you know how many different types of honeybees are there? I have this thing like honeybee analogy. I've been speaking about this since many years. How many types of honeybees? You said 3. Which ones?
There's this queen bee.
Queen, obviously.
And there's worker bees.
Queen and non-queens. So, not species. Drones. So there's a drone, there's a queen, and workers. 3, right? Any expert beekeepers in the room? No. Okay. So let's say that if I point towards a beehive, I ask you to identify the type of the bee. Can you do that?
Depends on the distance.
Depends on the distance. Now let's take that a step further. Which is the biggest IT park in Gurugram? Since I'm not from here. Biggest IT park, like you have like tens and hundreds of IT companies or cyber hub. So let's say you're in cyber hub, okay, and it's 5 or 6 in the evening. You usually see this massive horde leaving the hub I ask you to start pointing out the programmers, the testers, the BAs, the managers, the product managers. Can you do that? No. Why not? It's a mix of. But inside your organization, like in your offices, you do that. Okay? Now let's take from the perspective of a customer, a user, whoever. From our profession standpoint, we are all software engineers if we are in the business of software. It doesn't matter what role we play because everything that we do ultimately gets translated into a software. So we are all types of bees who have one job. Like the honeybees have the job, they make honey for humans. That's their job. No, but yeah, okay. The job of the honeybees is to make honey for humans. The job of the software engineer is to make software for humans. It doesn't matter what your role is. So I tend to stay away from the tech versus non-tech mostly. Because we are all software engineers, we are building software. And that's what is essential to know. As long as we can acknowledge this, we can move on. It's okay if you disagree, that's fine. We'll still move on. That makes sense? You're in the business of software, you're a software engineer. Okay? Alright. So let's move on to a few stories. I'm going to talk about the first story. I just thought of telling this the time I thought, or the time I felt that my team was fooling. This is a story from long back. It's, if I'm not wrong, 2012, maybe that long. I was working as a BA on one of the teams, and our product owner was not from India. The product owner used to sit in the UK at that time. So I was kind of the proxy. Right. And my job basically was to ensure that my team is getting everything that they would get from a PO, while the PO was not around. Be it anything from the stories to the backlog. Now, I didn't have as much authority as the product owner. Everything else that my team needs, they got from me. Now, I have recently moved from another team. So I used to work for this banking client who used to make like the software that we were making. The business logic primarily was written in PLC. Anyone heard of PLC? Yeah, it's the most agile software language. You know why? You decide what you want to do in the morning, by evening you have it. Extremely beautiful. You can write all your bunch of queries in PLC code. And quite frankly, there was a .NET front end to that project, but it was really fast. In 2012, the pace at which we were delivering for this banking client was amazing even for me. Because for someone like me who's not actively doing any hands-on development at that time, if I had an idea and that could be projected into some software by evening, nothing beats it. I moved to this new team who is like just having a bunch of lazy folks. I know this is getting recorded. But hold on, I have my reasons for that. This team was extremely slow. It was so slow that when we had one of our governance meetings with our CEO, I actually blurted in that meeting that this team is extremely slow. I was comparing it against the PLC equity. So obviously trust issues over. Like they were trusting me quite a lot by that time, as you know. So one fine evening, we are sitting and the trust issues have become so well known that we used to sit in a love triangle. So we used to sit in a triangle like the QA facing that side, the BA facing that side. It was a very nice setup that we had. We never used to look at each other's faces. And we were still building the product. So the tester comes to me in the evening and says that developer happens to be the tech lead, is saying that this particular story, particular piece cannot be built. There is a tech dependency. Okay? In my head, this team is a bunch of lazy people. They are extremely slow. My response, tell the tech lead that they have to build this and they have to figure out how to build. You go. I didn't even bother to turn back at that. For some reason, the developer got really offended. The developer got offended and the developer left. Next morning there was an escalation against me with the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master was like that this person is extremely rude, they don't respect what we do and how we do it. When the escalation happened, my ego was already hurt. I'm trying to make you a better team over here. You're escalating me. So ego was already hurt. I had two choices. Either I can build on top of the ego and take the fight to a different level, or I can swallow my pride and I can go and speak with the person and see what happens. Fortunately, I chose the second. Then to my Scrum Master said, "You be there, maybe at the top, the two of us will speak." And we started speaking. I simply asked, "Okay, explain to me why something is not possible." Okay, might get a little technical now, but whatever. Turns out that the database that we were using was MarkLogic. What is MarkLogic? It's an XML database. For us to save something in an XML database, we have to basically have an XML schema. The XML schema decides how the data is structured, and that is what gets saved in the database. Now, the elements that we were trying to save, that was not yet defined in the schema. If it's not defined in the schema, you cannot save that element in the database, which means that element will never come up on the schema. Hence, the story cannot be done. There is a tech dependency. And I was like, okay, this I understand. I do understand that why something is not possible because there is tech. Having said that, anything and everything is possible in any technology. Some may be done faster, some may be done slower, some may be done in a complicated way, some in a simpler way, but it is possible. What I was facing was a comparison between my previous team and the current team without acknowledging that there is a context that I was not aware of. So I did have a preconceived notion about, hey, maybe these people are just trying to fool me. And maybe it is not that big a deal than what I'm thinking. Fortunately, we were able to come to some agreement. We were able to understand and derive what we can do better. And we did become good friends, the TL and I. We ended up working together for many, many months after that. We made the product. We released many, many versions of those products. And it turned out to be fine. So that initial hiccup with the trust issues. Trust issues are still there. Like, I don't even believe my chart of updates in the morning are true. I don't even have confidence on myself. So trust issues are by default, but still, we were able to do something that was good. But I wanted to just go back historically and just try and think that have you been in a situation, not the exact situation, but in a situation where you thought that something that was being told to you may not be right. And maybe you questioned it, maybe you did not. But that feeling always lingered for a while. And you can just raise your hands if you've been there. Peacefully. Every second day. It happens. It happens to all of us. Okay. No takeaway from the story so far. Let's move on to the next story and see what really happened. Now, I usually say that people are good. No one wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to inject $4 in my system. No one ever does that. People are generally good. They want to do good work. They want to bring their best selves to the organization. The person of this story is not. Yeah. So this was, I was brought in to reply to an RFP, request proposal that came from a client, and I had to basically build the entire, whatever we could understand as requirements from that RFP so that we can come up with size, and that size is given to the client and we figure out the cost. Very simple. Now, what we had to do was extract transform load, ETL. Okay. If you don't know what is ETL, there's a transactional database There's an analytical database like a warehouse or something. Take the data, you transform it, you load it. It can be used for data mining later on, analytics and stuff like that. A lot of it, we have now moved to big data. We don't really do a lot of these things anymore. But there are still organizations and big products like AgilityToday that still exist, and these are used quite well. So a typical scenario that you would create for ETL is every scenario is to take some set of data and move. And you would do it in 2 steps. You first move one row. That's more like a test. So one row has moved successfully. If that happens, you move multiple rows. That's like when you take the entire dump and you put it in the second. Simple. So now let's say that if you come up with 10 scenarios that you want to basically build as a part of this transformation, you'll have 20 queries. 20 queries that are moving data from one place to another. Simple math. So identify all the scenarios, whatever scenarios we could identify from the RFP. Every scenario had 2 queries each. We also had some bunch of other requirements up and down so that it becomes a holistic system. And the tech lead and I, we go to the project manager so that we can do the sizing together before we send it to the client. And I start going through the scenarios one by one. We are discussing the scenarios with the manager and the tech lead. And after a few scenarios, the tech lead asks me to stop. It says, for each of these scenarios, 2 queries will not work. We need 3. We need 1 query for 1 row transfer. We need the second query for 2 rows transfer. And then we need this third query for a multi-row transfer. Now in my head, multi and 2 fall like in the same bucket. And I do question it, like, is it really necessary? This person is adamant like this. Just get to check. And at that point of time, I just accept it. Alright. You have 3 queries. That's fine. But after we did the sizing exercise with project manager, I did go to this person and I questioned, like, you really need to make me understand why did you ask me to put this additional query for every scenario? Because technically speaking, those 20 scenarios, those 20 queries of 10 scenarios have become 30 queries. So my efforts have gone up by 50%. Right? And for a long time, the tech lead just kept on saying, "No, it is needed, you don't understand, it's tech and you're non-tech." Even though I have been a developer in the past, I don't boast about it. There's some aspects which you do understand. Finally, the person broke and said, "Look, this is not a new client. Every time we go to this client with the size, they reduce the size by 1/3. So give them a loaded size by 50% so that at least the 33% buffer that you want, you get it." I'm like, okay, at least I understand the reason why you're doing it. But this is not the right way to do it. In the morning, I think Nilesh was discussing about the metric when you design. Whatever metric you design, your people work towards it. And never underestimate the power of a common developer. So if you design a metric that pushes them to figure out a way to make their lives easier, they will do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the way to do it, in this case, is wrong. The right way is to educate your client. We are the consultants, we need to be in that position where we can educate the clients and make it much better experience for them. At the same time, better experience for us. That's what we ended up doing. We went to the client, we explained to them everything, we gave them a size. Of course, there was pushback, there was negotiation. We did figure out a way. This happens with every single client that we do at some level. There are some clients who may push a lot, some who may not push a lot. And there's nothing wrong in that. The questioning actually is for understanding things better. So let's say from these 2 stories, very simple stories. One, I thought I was being fooled. The second one, I was being fooled, but okay, we figured out a way. But there are a few things that we understand that what we need to do in a situation, especially where we are in that relation where we do not understand or embrace tech completely. At the same time, we are in the business. We are honeybees, software engineers, right? So let's understand a few things what we can do. Firstly, swallow your pride, because you may be wrong. Right? Ego doesn't help anyone. Second, reach out and question to understand. Don't question for blame, question to understand. That's the curiosity that you're bringing. Ask questions for details. Get more details. Get yourself acquainted with the context. Once you have that, brainstorm for opportunities, for alternatives, everything. You don't brainstorm because you want to fight. You brainstorm because you can make something better. Now, the other thing that you need to remember from the second story is you still need to do the right thing. Right thing. Don't bloat up your estimates, for example. There is something known as ethical tech. Ethics matter in whatever we do. We need to be good citizens. We need to be ethical in our approaches to whatever we do. It can be building a product, can be providing a solution, anything. And those ethics are important. Your first principles are important. Doing the right thing. You had something to say.
Ethics is a two-way street. So it has to come from the other side also. It's not
Of
just
course.
enough for us being ethical or us not bloating up the thing. It has to come from the other side also.
Uniformly, we need to be ethical. It's not about I'll be ethical, you don't be. Uniformly, we need to be ethical. Which brings me to the third step, and probably the more challenging one that I have started realizing myself since the past few years, months, weeks, whatever you call it, because this happened last week as well. How closely do we understand tech? In the morning, Rahul was giving an example about how tech has changed over the years. There was a time when tech and business were silos, independent entities. Slowly, they started overlapping a bit where tech became an enabler or a supporting function. Slowly and more steadily, today tech is at the core. There are businesses and organizations who rely on tech. Zomato and Swiggy won't operate if tech does not exist. And we are gradually moving in that direction where almost every business relies on tech so much that their entire business is run through tech. And there are good reasons for it. For example, we cannot be as fast as automation ever. Humans are always going to be slow. So we need to take advantage of that. Which means that we need to get closer to tech as much as we can. So I boil it down to the most basic level of how we operate. One of the ways that we operate, and I'm saying one of the ways, is if you're working in an agile team, it's very common to use user stories. Now, a lot of us write user stories in pretty much, there's an as a user, I want something, and so that there's a value, with a bunch of acceptance criteria. And yet, even with the acceptance criteria in place, there are times when stories don't behave the way how we wish them to behave after they have been developed. Why? They should, right? I mean, agile is the answer to everything. So there is the concept of acceptance tests. And the idea of a story, not even the idea as of today, this is like way back when the story, user stories applied book came. We need to move to a level of acceptance tests. That is what defines when a story is done. And these acceptance tests are automated. Because that's what we want to take advantage of, automation. Now, if I do go to that extreme, there are concepts like behavior-driven development and acceptance test-driven development that we need to embrace. Most of the teams do not work that way. But these are not new concepts. These are not concepts that I'm speaking about them for the first time in this room. These have been spoken about since the past 10, 20 years. Now let's say if I do take one of those examples, here's the user story. If I ask you, people who may not be very familiar with code and tech, if I ask you to write your user stories in this format, will you be comfortable? No. No. I did the same thing. Last week, Agile India, I conducted a workshop around how you engage with user stories, and I put this on the screen, and people were like, these are text stories, we can't write this. Now hold on before you get into that mode. If you just start reading, okay, forget about the format for a while. Just start reading and tell me if there's anything tech about it. Is it? If you're working on platforms and you're working with APIs, it's the reality. You can't stay away from it. If I just simply read through it, there are some parameters that I need to get. Those parameters are either in quotes or in the brackets. And then there's a bunch of test data. That's all. It's not even needed that a non-tech person is sitting in the corner and trying to decode this entire thing by themselves. We have the practice of three amigos. This is anyway supposed to be done in a group. And it's really not that difficult to learn. So if you go on Cucumber's website, Cucumber is basically a test framework, if you want to put it that way. You go on a website, go in the references section, the Gherkin script reference, you will get it's maximum a 3-page documentation that explains how you're supposed to write these things. There's absolutely nothing technical in it, except for the syntax. What happens is that if you start embracing these kind of practices, you automatically start working together, because now tech, non-tech testers, developers, BAs, POs, they are speaking the same language. And that's usually where we differ. We don't speak the same language. The problem is not about that, hey, we can't understand each other, it's that we're not speaking the same language. This is an example of a common language. And this is not even the only way. People who work in extreme programming, for example, there is a concept of metaphors, which is also nothing but common language. So let's say if we take practices like these, then this statement becomes true. Because now you're not different. You're not a sub-team within a team. You are a team working together. You're not questioning each other, you collaborate. So a simple language change fixes your problems about trust issues, for example, among many other things. Let's say if you do this, there is also something known as a zero defect policy. Is it possible for you to have zero defects in your system? Yes, it's possible, come on. How many of you say you can't have a zero defect system? Come on.
Show me one product that has zero defects.
So let's
Depends on how you define, if you define a defensor, let's say I can write a defensor, it's able to write, then it has zero defects. Then you can say,
No, but you're describing action.
let's bring it to software.
Yeah, it's a feature, it's not a product.
So here's the thing, if you do find a bug in production, what do you usually do? RCA! Nice! So you basically do a bug triage, where people come in a room and you fight. You fight to prove if it's a bug or a change request. One of you win. Right? And whoever wins gets paid. No? So here's the crazy thing. Let's say if I buy a car and it has a defect, like I take it out of the showroom and it has a defect, and I go back to the showroom and say, hey, you have given me a defective piece, please fix it. They say, sure sir, we'll fix it for you, 10 lakhs. What would you do? You just bought it, why should you pay for it? Okay? But if it's a software and you have already been paid for rolling out a software to production for which there should not have been a defect, you still get your salaries and billing for fixing those bugs. We spoke about ethical working.
See, ethically we didn't put the budget.
Ethically we did good. For a user it doesn't matter if you call it a change request or a bug. For the user something is not good. Let's talk about what a zero defect policy is. If we work this way, which are acceptance tests, and these acceptance tests are automated, the question always comes, right, when is a story done? A story is done when all the acceptance tests are green. Automated acceptance tests are green. If we continue working in this way, then we keep on putting things in production which have all of their tests passing. Now if you do find a bug in production, and you will find a bug in production, the question is not about bug triage and root cause analysis, it is always a missing test. You are changing the vocabulary of working. You're working together with your product owner, right? It's a teamwork. So your product owner is there when you're doing these things. So they're as equally involved in identifying these automated tests as anyone else. So if all of your tests have passed, which means at that point of time, you have covered all the scenarios that you knew about. But now if something does come in production, and it will, stop fighting. Just go and add that additional test and go to production again. Because the user doesn't care if it's a test, if it's a bug or a change in test. That's the philosophy of a zero defect policy. So yeah, zero defects are possible if we do embrace it. But that's all that I had for today. So like 3 stories and a quotation from The Who, one of my favorite bands. Won't get fooled again if we just do these few things.
Yeah, fooling.
Even if that works. As I said, best way to connect with me, I do have a website that I'm more active on LinkedIn. Do connect, do speak with me. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.